Okay, gewaltig. Good morning. We are starting a new parak today, Yosy Vespenoi. Zog the Heilige Gemara. Yosy Vespenoi, the prohibition of shechting an animal and its child, noig, bein baritz, bein b'chutz la'aretz. And the Rashi tells us there's no chiddush in the fact that it's noig, bein baritz, or bein b'chutz la'aretz, because, in fact, it's not a mitzvah tli baritz. It's a mitzvah of an animal. But the reason why it lists off some of these inclusions of where it applies is because of the next couple of halachas that the Mishnayos are going to introduce where it would be relevant. So, Ois v'espinoi noig bein baris bein b'chutz la'aretz. B'fnei abayis v'shaloi b'fnei abayis. It was relevant during the time of the Beis Hamikdash. And when there's no Beis Hamikdash, again, that has nothing to do with the carbon. B'chulin uv'mikdashin, it applies to an animal that's chulin or an animal that's hektish. Ketzat, hashoichet oisay v'espinoi. What if someone shechts oisay v'espinoi chulin b'chutz, which is what you're supposed to do? You're supposed to shecht chulin b'chutz. So you shechted in one day a mother or father and its child. We're going to discuss later today if Oisay V'espinoi is the father and the son, or if it's the mother and the son, or if it's both. But whatever it is, Hashoichet Oisay V'espinoi chulin b'chutz. So the halach is shneim kasher. They're both mutter to eat. Even though you were over Oisay V'espinoi in the shchita of the second one, that doesn't make it not kosher. You still can eat it. But v'asheni soifik es haraboyim. Whoever shechted the second animal will receive malchus because it's the shchita of the second animal that violated the law of Oisay V'espinoi. And it doesn't matter which one was shechted first. Kachim b'chutz. What if there were two animals, Oisay V'espinoi, there were karbanos, and you shechted them b'chutz? So now there are some extra complications here. The first one that you shechted kachim b'chutz, there's a chiyav kares for that. So a rishon chayiv kares, v'shneim pesulim, they'll both be possible because the first one is possible because of shchutei chutz. The second one is possible because it's also not shechted inside. The reason why you don't get kares for shchutei chutz for the second is because the halacha is the only time you have a chiyav kares for shechting kachim b'chutz is if had you shechted it b'fnim, it would be kosher. But v'balt, this animal, when you're shechting it b'fnim, it would be a problem because it's oisay v'espinoi. Therefore, there's no chiyuv for shchutei chutz. So therefore, the Rishon's chayiv kares u'shneim psulim, they're both possible u'shneim soifkin es haraboyim, and they both will get malchus because one is oisay v'espinoi and one is shchutei chutz. Chulin b'fnim. What if you shechted oisay v'espinoi? Both are chulin b'fnim. You're not allowed to shecht chulin b'azara. So the halacha shneim psulim. They're both possible. You're not allowed to eat chulin b'azara. V'asheni soifik es haraboyim. And the second one that you shechted will not malchus because that was over oisay v'espinoi. What about kachim b'fnim? You took two karbanis, a mother and a child, and you shechted them b'fnim. So harishon will be kosher upater because it's a regular carbon. That's what you're supposed to do with a carbon shechted b'fnim. But v'asheni, the second one, is soifik es haraboyim. We get mal because it's oisay v'espinoi upasul. It'll be possible because it's mechusar zman. It's not yet ready to be shechted because it's oisay v'espinoi. Okay, weiter. Chulin v'kachim b'chutz. So now the order is very relevant. The first one you shechted chulin, and it was b'chutz, and then the second one was kachim, you also shechted it b'chutz. So a reaching kosher upater, the first shchita is perfect. You shechted an animal b'chutz. It's chulin, that's what's supposed to happen. But v'asheni soifik es haraboyim. The second animal that you shechted, it was kachim, you shechted it b'chutz, you're going to get malchus for oisay v'espinoi. Upasul, and it'll be possible, of course, because it was kachim b'chutz. The reason why there's no kares for the kachim b'chutz is, like we said earlier, it's called mechusar zman because it wasn't yet ready to be shechted, because it's not allowed to be shechted that day. Okay, how about kachim v'chulin b'chutz? So the first animal was kachim that you shechted b'chutz. The second animal was chulin. So the halach is a rishon chayiv kares because that's a classic textbook example of kachim b'chutz. Upasul, and of course it will be a pasul carbon. Vasheni, which is chulin that you shechted b'chutz, kosher. But ushneim soifkin es harboim. For both shchitus you get malchus. The first one because of kachim b'chutz, and the second one because of oisai vespenoi. What about chulin v'kachim b'fnim? You took a mother and a daughter, or a mother and a son. You shech. The first one was chulin. You shechted it b'fnim. It was chulin bazara, and the second one was a carbon. So the halach is shneim psulim. They're both going to be possible. The first one you shechted is possible because it's chulin bazara. The second one that you shechted is possible because it's mechosers man. You weren't allowed to shechted today because of isis v'nai. The hasheni soivik es harboim. You only get malchus for the oisav ispanoi, not for chulin lazara. There's no malchus for chulin lazara, Rashi says, because it's a lav habo mechlal asay, and therefore it has the din of an asay. Kachim v'chulin bifnim. What if you shech the two animals? The first one was kachim, second one was chulin. They were bifnim. So our region kasher upater. The first one is a perfect carbon. V'asheni soivik es harboim because of oisai vespanoi. Upasul, and you're not allowed to eat it because it is chulin lazar. Chulin lazar you're not allowed to eat. What about chulin b'chutz b'fnim? They were both chulin. The first one you shechted outside the way you were supposed to. The second one you shechted it inside as chulin lazar. So our region kasher upater. The first shechita is perfect. Vasheni, which was chulin bazara, soivig es harboim because of oisav espenoi. Upasul, you're not allowed to eat it because chulin lazar we don't eat. Kachim b'chutz ub'fnim. What if you had two karbanos? The first one you shechted b'chutz, the second one you shechted b'fnim. So harishon chayiv korisk, because it's a classic case of shchutei chutz. Ushneim soifkim es harboim, and you get malchus for both. The first one for shchutei chutz, the second one for oisoi v'espenoi. Ushneim psulim, and they'll both be possible. Of course, the shchutei chutz it's possible, and even the one that was b'fnim is possible because it was mechusers man. Chulin b'fnim u'b'chutz. What if you shechted chulin? The first one was b'fnim, the second one was b'chutz. Harisha pasel u'pater. The first animal you can't eat because it's chulin bazara, but there's no law for it, so you're pater. Vasheni, which was oisav ispanoi, savik esaboim, but the kosher, just because you violated the issue of oisav ispanoi, that doesn't disqualify the shechita. It's still a kosher shechita. What about kachim b'fnim u'b'chutz? So a region kosher upater, because that's exactly what you're supposed to do with kachim, is shechted b'fnim. But vasheni soivig es harboim because of oisav espenoi upasol, and it's pasol. Why isn't there a chiyuv kares for shchutei chutz? The answer is simple, because it was mechusas man, because it was oisav espenoi. Beautiful. Tanu rabbanon minayin oisav espenoi shenoig b'mukdoshim. How do you know that the issue of oisav espenoi doesn't only apply to chulin, that it applies to hektish as well? So the obvious question is, if the Torah says oisav espenoi you shouldn't eat, why would I assume that it applies only to chulin and not mekdoshim? So Tosfos asks this kasha right away. Minayin loisav espenoi shenoig b'mekdoshim. V'im fake Tosfos v'amai sol kadaydach the loyai rekrab b'mekdoshim hastomach siv. Why would you think that it doesn't apply across the board? The ein loymar, and don't tell me that the reason why you would need it is the itzrich she'im tzarich lepesach. Let's say you needed the benoi, you shechted the oisoi, and now you needed the benoi for carbon pesach, and you don't have any other option for your carbon pesach. The ein loy al oisoi shenishchet boy beyoim avay benoi the solkadaitach. I would have thought the osei asay the pesach v'dachi lav the oisoi vespenoi. I would have thought that maybe the mitzvah to bring the carbon pesach will be doiched the iser voice v'spinoi, el lahachi yitzrech the loidachi, and that's the reason why the Gemara is asking here. How do I know that it applies to the Mikdoshim, even in a scenario where there might be an essay doich alois is a configuration, el lahachi yitzrech the loidachi, and we even find something similar. The chiagav narminan lakaman b'shaluch hakein. In Perek Shluch HaKein, which we're going to eventually get to, there's a similar scenario. How do you know that even in the Dvar Mitzvah you have to make Shluch HaKein? Zogt Tosfos, you know why that's not an option? It's not only a lav of oisav espenoi, there's an essay as well. uvalav kra loidachi layasei. And therefore the assay of the mitzvah of Korban Pesach, we would never have a havamina that it would be doichadis or Yosy v'Espanoi. So the question remains, why does the Gemara need a makar that Yosy v'Espanoi applies to Mukdashim? Why wouldn't it? Venira. Okay, so Tosfos' answer is going to have to do with what the Gemara is going to answer. So maybe we'll get back to it a little bit later. Let's see what the Gemara answers. Zok the Gemara Taner Rabban Minayin Loisav Espanoi Shanoig B'Mukdashim Talmud Loimer Shar Akesav Ayez Kivaleit, which is referring to Kachim. Uchsiv Basrei V'Shar Ayseh Aysav Espanoi L'Shishch Dubi Mechad. Let's look at the two psukim. Pasuk number 1 is Shar Akesav Ayez Kivaleit. Clearly, we're talking about karbanos. The very next pasuk says, so let's say that just like this is speaking about kachim, this is also speaking about kachim. So Zok to Gemara, which is referring to kachim, and right after that it says it teaches us al oisay v'espenoi shenoig b'mukdashim. It tells us that oisay v'espenoi is noig even by hektish.
Doesn't the pasuk make the question even stronger? Why not? The verse starts off with, how do we know it's noig b'mukdashim?
Correct.
Well,
the question where it is, why do you need enough in the pasuk? Why would I say otherwise? It says v'sharay say oisay v'espenoi l'shishchatu b'yamechad. That includes everything. Why do I need a special pasuk to tell me that it applies to Mukdashim? So here it is telling me that it applies to Mukdashim. But Tosfos is struggling with why we need that. So now let's go back to Tosfos. Now that we see what the limit is from, it's because the pasuk of Yosy v'Espanoi is directly following a pasuk that's discussing the mitzvah of a korban. So let's see what Tosfos says. Venira, the meikara kashaloi, the original concern was mishum deshar hifzik ha'inyan. The Gemara is going to shortly say that you might think it wouldn't apply to kachim. You know why? Because it says shari kesef or eis kiyavalid, right? V'hayishiv v'shavim tachasimoi, and then it should just go on. Why did it have to repeat shar eseh again? It already says we're talking about shar kesef v'yes. So why did the Torah have to why did the Torah once again have to repeat shar eseh? So that seems to tell us that it's a new story, and it shouldn't apply to kachim. So Zok Tosfos, that's the reason why the Gemara is clearing. Sure, by default, Yosy v'Espanoi should apply to everything. But if we bought the Torah that Shari said, it's almost like the Torah says, okay, new parsha, this only applies to Chullin. So when near the Mikar Kashlim from the Shar Hifsik Inyan, the Mashma Lamuta Mikdashim, and that's why the Lakla Meimar Mishum the Loitema b'Mikdashim Dafke Bo Lahafsik. Don't tell me that the reason why it says Shar so again is to tell us that this actually doesn't apply to Hektish. It's a new thing that applies exclusively to Chullin. Because otherwise, the whole parsha of Yosy v'Espanoi shouldn't have been in this area. The Torah could have put it somewhere else. The fact that the Torah put it while we're discussing Kachim is proof positive that it does apply to Kachim as well. Right, that's not Yosy v'Espanoi. That means every child, every behem has to be at least 8 days old before you shecht it. But you still can't shecht the mother and the son, even if they're 8 days old. Yeah.
No, so why would it repeat itself? If it's
why did it repeat Shar Eseh?
Yeah.
I'm not sure why did the Torah repeat Shar Eseh, but the fact that it does could indicate that it's Hifsik Inyan, and it doesn't apply to Kachim. Kamash Malon, since it's located right near the Parsha of Kachim, we'll say.
But what does it add if it applies to Kachim?
I'm sorry?
What does it add to our understanding?
That the Isra of Yosy v'Espanoi, not only does it apply to animals of Chullin, it also applies to Karbanis. You're not allowed to shecht Yosy v'Espanoi for Karbanis.
So we don't know that from the first pasuk?
The first pasuk is not talking about Yosy v'Espanoi. First pasuk is just saying that before you can shecht something as a korban, it has to be 8 days old.
Right. Okay.
But since this pasuk is right after that pasuk, if Oisav Espanoi did not apply to Kachim, if you're going to make that argument, well then why did the Torah put the halacha of Oisav Espanoi right after the pasuk talking about Kachim? Could have put it anywhere. Could have put it in Parsha Shmini when it's talking about kosher animals. The fact that it placed it there shows that it must be referring to Kachim.
So now we
Frank,
would
you
think
mo-
it only applies to Kachim.
Oh, exactly your kasha. If it's right there by Kachim, so maybe you should say that it only applies to Kachim and not to Chullin. So for that, Dr. Gemara, Shar Hifzik Inyan. The fact that it repeated Shar again, the Shar Iseh, if it was only referring to Kachim, then it would have segued directly from the last pasuk into this pasuk. A, by Kachim, it's got to be 8 days old. And B, you can't do Oisav Espanoi. Since it repeats Shar Iseh, as if to sever it from the previous Inyan and to make it a standalone mitzvah, we say that it applies to Chulin as well. Hifzik Inyan. Frank the Gemara, so if it's Hifzik Inyan, Ve'ema b'Chulin b'Mukdashim loy, because of that Hifzik Inyan, so we're dancing on both sides of the fence over here. It says Shar, which would indicate it's a new thing, but it says Vav to include it. Frank the Gemara, ma Kachim b'Chlayim loy, af Oisav Espanoi Klayim loy. If we're connecting it to Kachim, so let's say it should have other features that it shares with Kachim, and that is just like by Kachim, you're not allowed to use a behema of Klayim for Kachim. So too, the Isser of Oisav Espanoi shouldn't apply to Klayim. So Rashi should Rochel sheyoldim in atayish v'shachta v'esbena. Because once you're saying that we're comparing it to Kachim, so then it should share similar halachas with Kachim. Just like Klayim is not pertinent to Kachim, so too Klayim shouldn't be pertinent to the Isser of Oisav Espanoi. But we know that's not true. Allah Matanya Oisav Espanoi is noig b'Klayim ubikvi. So we know for sure that Isser of Oisav Espanoi applies even to Klayim. And we have another problem. It says Shar Oiseh. Now there's a limud that we learn from the Seh. V'Omer Rava taught us something about Seh. Turning on top of the base. What did Rava teach us about Seh? Zebana of. There's a binyan of Kol Mokom Shenemar Seh. Anytime the Torah uses the word Seh, Einoi Elo Lahoitzi Esaklayim. So now we have two kashas why the Isser of Oisav Espanoi should not apply to Klayim. A is because let's learn from Kachim, just like Klayim doesn't apply to Kachim, so too Klayim shouldn't apply to Oisav Espanoi. And B, it says Seh when we're discussing Oisav Espanoi, and Rava told us that any time the Torah mentions Seh, it means to exclude Klayim. And the question is, what is the first Seh where we learn it from? So there's a machlekes Rashi and Tosfos, which the word Seh in which pasuk is the source of this binyanav. Our Seh by Oisav Espanoi is definitely not the source. We're just saying, since we know from some other source somewhere out there that every time it says Seh, it excludes Klayim, well, guess what? By Oisav Espanoi, it says Shar Oiseh. So, the Torah is telling us that the Isser of Klayim does not apply to Oisav Espanoi. So, with that, Omer Kra Oi. It says Shar Oiseh. Could have said Shar Viseh. Lo Yisishch Tu B'Yom Echad. Oisav Espanoi Lo Yisishch Tu B'Yom Echad. Why did it say Oi? That word Oi, Shar Oiseh, is extra. Lo Rabbi Yisishch Klayim. So, even though the word Seh, you might think, would exclude Klayim, since it says Oi, Oi is telling us that it includes Klayim. So Rashi, that answers both our kashas. The fact that it says Seh, we don't go according to the binyan av to say it excludes Klayim. And the second question is the fact that it's in proximity to Kachim, we don't learn from Kachim that it doesn't apply to Klayim. Oy tells us that Klayim is also forbidden from Oisav Espanoi.
So how does the climb happen here?
Well, let's say a sheep mated with a goat, and they had a child. So that child you cannot check the same day as one of its parents.
So that happens. Sheep and goats are
I'm not an expert in what works, but it means if two different minim mated and had a child, that child would also be prohibited from Yosy V'Spanoi. Sorry?
Not if they work together?
That's a different type of claim, but that wouldn't necessarily net children.
Okay.
Zok to Gemara, how could you tell me that? I'm sorry. How could you tell me that from the word oy you're going to learn klayim? That oy is tafus. That oy is occupied with a different mission. Hi oy mi boile lechalek. We needed to tell me that it's not both a shor Yosy V'Spanoi and a sa Yosy V'Spanoi. Because if it was a shor v'sa Yosy V'Spanoi l'shishchum echad, I would think you're not over until you shech two pairs of animals, a shor and a child, a sa and a child. So the oy says either one or the other will be a violation. Hi oy mi boile lechalek. Tesal kedaitech amina ad shachid shor ubenoi and v'sa ubenoi loy mechayiv. Because if it's a shor v'sa Yosy V'Spanoi l'shishchum echad, I would think you have to shecht two sets of animals. Kamashlan oy lechalek, either a shor and a benoi, oy sa and a benoi, either one would be a violation. Zok to Gemara, so you're telling me oy is not extra, I cannot use it for klayim because I need it lechalek. Zok to Gemara, no, I have a different word lechalek, benoi. It says Yosy Ves benoi. It doesn't say Yosy Ves benom. It's in singular fashion, so benoi nafke. So therefore, from benoi I learn lechalek. I still have oy in excess to teach us that the mitzvah or the iser of Yosy V'Spanoi applies to klayim as well. Fragt Gemara, but vakate mi boile lichiditanya. I still need oy to tell me a different limud. I still don't have it available to teach us that it applies to klayim. What is the brisa? Ilu nemar shor v'seh ubenoi. If it would have said shor v'seh ubenoi lo yishchadu b'yom echad hayisi omer, I would have mistakenly thought ad sheyishchad shor v'seh ubenoi. I would have to shech a shor and the seh and the benoi of only one of them, and I would have to shech three animals to be a violation. Talmud Omer shor oy seh Yosy V'Spanoi. Clearly, it's either a shor ubenoi or a seh and the benoi. It doesn't have to be both. My love may oy nafkalei. So if you read the brisa on its face, it seems to be using the word oy to tell us that it's either one set or the other set, which means oy will no longer be available for what we needed it for, to teach us that it applies to klayim as well. So we're not learning it from oy. May oysoi V'Spanoi. Oysoi means one of these two animals, V'Spanoi, and its child. So weiter oy still remains extra. Fragt the Gemara, we're going to be learning later today a machlokes between Chananya and the Rabbanon. And according to the Rabbanon, that word oisai is available. If that word oisai is available, we can use it for the Brises halacha to tell you it's either a shor or a seh and benoi. And therefore, oy is still available to teach us that Yosy V'Spanoi applies to klayim. Ela lechananya daloi miyaser loy oisai. According to Chananya, that I don't have the word oisai, I need it for something else, which we'll see later on. Well, then I don't have oisai to tell me one or the other. I need oy. So if I need oy to tell me one or the other, I don't have the availability of oy to teach us that it applies to klayim. So he can use it to teach us what the Bryce is coming for, and we still have oy to teach us that it applies to klayim. But we're going to soon see that Chananya holds we need oy for something else. If he's using oy for klayim and oy for something else, how will he know that it's shor oy? Zog to Gemara lachalek lo tzarich kra. We don't need a pasuk lachalek, and we're going to now tap into the famous machlokes between Rabbi Yonasan and Rabbi Yosy. Whenever it says shor v'seh, does that mean shor and seh, or does that mean shor oiseh? By default, even without the word oy, does that mean one or the other, or does it mean to include both? So Chananya holds lachalek l'tzarich kra because he holds that it always means one or the other. It doesn't mean both. The Savar law of Yonasan, he holds like Rabbi Yonasan. Where is the source of this machlokes? By the isser to curse a mother or a father. The Tanya we learned, Ish asher yikalel es aviv ve'es imay. He's the one who's chayiv misa. So ainli ella aviv ve'imay. I would think it says asher yikalel es aviv ve'es imay, meaning in order to be chayiv misa, he has to curse Sai, his father, and his mother. Aviv shaloi imay, ve'imay shaloi aviv minayin. What if he only curses his father and not his mother, or vice versa? How do we know that that's also the violation? Talmud Leimer aviv ve'imay kilel, aviv kilel, imay kilel, divrei Rabbi Yosy. So Rabbi Yosy holds we needed to have a special limud to tell us that it's one or the other, and we'll get into what that limud is in a moment. But Rabbi Yosy Leimer, mashma shneim kechad, umashma echad b'fnei atzmai. By default, that always means one or the other. So when it says Isha sheyakal is aviv ve'esimai, we know by default it doesn't mean both. It means one or the other. Because whenever it lists off two items, it always means one or the other, and I don't need any special limud to teach me that. Unless the Torah tells me that no, it dafka is both. So by default, it doesn't mean both, it means one or the other. If the Torah tells you prefers it's both, then it means both. So now, at this point, we see that according to Rabbi Yonasan, I don't need oisai lechalek, so oisai can be used to tell me that it's shor I said, and therefore I have oi that's still going to be extra. Okay. Zok to Gemara, Rabbi Yonasan. So let's look into Rabbi Yoshi's reasoning. Rabbi Yosy said, how do we know that by Mikal of Vima it's either one or the other? Because of Vimikil of Kilimikil. What does that mean? So let's have a look at the actual psukim about Ish Asher Yakalel, and everything will become crystal clear. It says in the pasuk, Ki ish asher Yakalel es aviv es imay, moishumos. Now in this first clause, which parent is closer to the word Yakalel? Aviv, right? It says Asher Yakalel es aviv es imay. So the word aviv is closer to the word Yakalel. Now if you read the second half of the same pasuk, it says moishumos aviv imay kilel damavoy. Now the mother is closer to the word kilel. So if we bound in the beginning of the pasuk, the av is closer to the word kilel, and in the sefer of the pasuk, the mother is closest to the kilel. We see that if you sheltered either one, it will be a chiyuv of misa. So therefore, Dr. Rabbi Yosy, the Torah is specifically teaching us that it's one or the other, but by default, I would assume it means both. However, Rabbi Yosy says no. It always means one or the other. The only time it doesn't mean one or the other is only if the Torah tells you specifically that it's both together. And what is an example of that? The example of that is Klayim, the Klayim that Duvi was referring to a moment ago. It says, Lo sachrosh b'chamor v'shor yachtov. Why did it have to say yachtov for? It could have said, Lo sachrosh b'shor v'chamor. And I would know it's together. The teretz is, I wouldn't know that it's together, unless the Torah says yachtov. So for the fact that the Torah says yachtov there is a rise that if it wouldn't have said a yachtov, I would have thought l'sachrish b'shar v'chamor means don't do charisha with a shor by itself or a chamor by itself. That's what I would have thought.
How would that be claimed?
It wouldn't be claim. It would be a different isser. It would be an isser to use a shor to do. We would have thought that the Torah for some reason is prohibiting to plow with a shor. You got to use a John Deere or a Caterpillar, but not a shor, right? So Zok to Gemara. Okay, so we referenced earlier a machlokes Chananya and the Rabbanon, where according to Chananya I need oisoi, but according to the Rabbanon I don't need oisoi. So let's actually get to the source of this machlokes and see what it's all about. Zok to Gemara, my Chananya umay Rabbanon. What is Chananya and what is the Rabbanon? What is this machlokes about? The Tanya we learned oisoi ves benoi. It's not a father and a son, even though Isa is Lashon Zocher, it's actually a mother and a child. That is what the sheet of the Rabbanon is. So it only applies to a mother and a child, not a father and a child, which is pretty good, because how in the world are you going to identify the father of every animal, right? Chananya Omer, Chananya says no, noig bein b'scharim uvein b'nekevis, which means you got to keep track of the children of every male to know that you can't check them both together. My time of the Rabbanan. Where do the Rabbanan know that the Isra V'Osav Espanoi applies to females, mothers only? Sorry? No, it says Oisav Espanoi l'sishch tu emechad. Forget it. It's much from the Lashon Pasuk Oisai that it's referring to a male, because Oisai doesn't say Oisa V'Espanoi. It says Oisai V'Espanoi. But the Rabbanan still say it only applies to a female. The Tanya we learned, Yachol Yehei Oisai V'Espanoi Noig Bein B'Zchorim Bein V'Nekevos. I would have thought that the Isra Oisav Espanoi applies both to male and female animals, and we're talking about the parent here. Vidinu, the teretz is, I have a svara to say for Kert. Because Chayiv Kan, there's a Chayiv Malchus for Oisav Espanoi, V'Chayiv Be'ei Malbonim. We also know there's an Isser Losikach Ha'ei Malabonim, right? Rather, Shalayach T'Shalach Ha'ei V'Sabonim Tikachlach. Now, let's compare the two Averis. Makish Chayiv Be'ei Malabonim, B'Nekevos V'Loi B'Scharim. We know by the mitzvah of Shluch HaKain, it's only by a mother. It says Losikach Ha'eim Alabonim. So there the Torah tells us specifically it only applies to a mother and a child. So therefore we should say equally, Af Kishachayiv Kan, so too when the Torah is Mechayiv Malchus for Oisav Espanoi, B'Nekevos V'Loi B'Scharim. So there's a good logical argument to make, Zokter Rabbanan, to support our approach that it only applies to females and not males.
But we don't know. We don't always know which male inseminated.
That would be very, very difficult. According to Chananya, that would be pretty challenging. Exactly, you'd have to keep track, and I don't even know how you would do that. That would be pretty challenging.
Sometimes we can't keep track of humans.
Right? They say, what's the most confusing day in Harlem?
Right.
So to Gemara, Loyim Amrit Be'em Alabonim, you can't compare the two. Be'em Alabonim, Shekain Loy Asa Ba Mezumin Kishayin Mezumin. There's a huge kula by the by the mitzvah Shluch HaKain. And that is, it only applies to if you run into it hefker. But if you are raising birds, there is no such prohibition of loisikach eim alabanim. So there's a huge kula in the halach of shluch hakein. So maybe that's why it only applies to a mother. We see other halachas in which oisav espanoi is much more chomer than shaluch hakein. So maybe it's also more chomer than shaluch hakein in the fact that it should apply to a father as well. Talmud Lomer oisai echad v'loi shnayim. Oisai, only one of the parents is prohibited from being shechted on the same day as its child, and that is the mother and not the father. How do we know that it's the mother and not the father? It says oisai, it says one of the two parents. How do we know which parent the Torah is referring to? Zok to Gemara, the Rabbanan conclude, Acha shechilak hakosov, once the Torah is telling us that it doesn't apply to both parents, then I can use my logic to determine which parent the Torah is referring to. So chisi ladin, chayiv kan, v'chayiv b'im alabonim. Ma k'shechayiv b'im alabodim b'nekevis v'loi b'scharim, av k'shechayiv kan b'nekevis v'loi b'scharim. So in other words, on my own, I wouldn't be able to say, just because by Shluch HaKain it only applies to a mother, so too, by Oisav Espanoi it should only apply to a mother. Because Oisav Espanoi is more chomer, maybe it applies to both. But once the Torah already tells me that by Oisav Espanoi it doesn't apply to both, and now I have to pick which one, so then I could look back to Shluch HaKain and say it's referring to the same one as Shluch HaKain was referring to the mother. Now, V'im nafshich loimer. So you see over here, the Rabbanan are using Oisai to teach us this halacha. Now we said according to the Rabbanan, Oisai is extra, right? But right now we've just used Oisai. But here comes the kicker. But v'im nafshich loimer, let's say for some reason you don't think the limit from Oisai is a good valid raya that it doesn't apply to a father. I have a plan B. Benoi, it says Oisai is Benoi. Misha Benoi karach acharov, and this probably is touching on what David just said. Benoi Misha Benoi karach acharov. The child is always attached to its mother, not its father. So the svar is when the Torah said benoi, it means the animal that where it's clear this is benoi. Where is it clear that this is benoi? The mother is clear this is benoi because the baby is going to follow the mother around. The baby doesn't follow the father around. So benoi means it's obvious that this is the child of this animal, meaning it's with the mother. Yosy zachar, this excludes a male animal. Shein benoi karich acharav. So now at this point, where the Chachamim just said that they know that Oisavus Benoi only applies to a mother and a son from Benoi, so Oisa is redundant. So this is what the Gemara meant earlier, Bishlam according to the Rabbanan, that Oisa is extra. And therefore you can use it to tell us L'chalek, or you could use for Klayim. But according to Chananya, when Oisa is needed for something else, how would you know it's L'chalek? Now, where is Chananya? Where does he use Oisei for? So we'll see in a minute. Why do the Rabbanan need a plan B? The plan A was good, Oisei. Why do they need to use Benoi? The teretz is because you could have argued. V'chitema Oisei Zochar Mashma. Oisei screams Zochar. It should say Oisei Vespanai, not Oisei. So don't use Oisei to say it means one parent and it means the mother. To the contrary, if the whole makar that it only means one of the two parents is Oisei, logic should dictate that it's the father because Oisei is male. So therefore, Areyu Omer Benoi, it says Benoi, Misha Benoi Karach Acharav, Yotza Zachar Shein Benoi Karach Acharav. So according to the Chachamim, we don't use Oisei because Oisei actually wouldn't work for us. It might include only male, not female. Benoi is the makar, so Oisei is extra. But according to Chananya, Ksiv Oisai the Mashma Zachar. He says it does say Oisai, which is Mashma male. Uksiv Benoi, and it also says Benoi, Misha Benoi Karach Acharav, the Mashma Nekeva. So it's both. Hilchach Noig Bein B'Scharim Ubein B'Nekevois, but he is using Oisai. So that's what the Gemara meant earlier, according to Chananya, where we need Oisai. How could you learn L'chalek? So we therefore have to say that Chananya holds, like Rabbi Yonasan, that by default it's L'chalek unless the Torah says it means both. Okay, Baruch Hashem, we were zeicher to finish Daf Ayin Ches, and Be'ez Hashem tomorrow Shabbos we will learn Daf Ayin Tes. Shkoyach.